Hello and welcome to the Cultured Bumpkin. This is chapter 25 of Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen. And yeah, we're going to do a little reading tonight. Really pushing hard to get done so I can edit next week because I won't be in my studio. So I'll do some lives. I'm thinking of doing like The Hobbit or something next week, or working on that. But I'm not going to make an audiobook out of it. It'll just be live readings since it's still copyrighted. Like a little interactive time or something like that. We'll see. Chapter 25. The visions of romance were over. Catherine was completely awakened. Henry's address, short as it had been, had more thoroughly opened her eyes to the extravagance of her late fancies than all their several disappointments had done. Most grievously, most grievously was she humbled. Most bitterly did she cry. It was not only with herself that she was sunk, but with Henry. Her folly, which now seemed even criminal, was all exposed to him, and he must despise her forever. The liberty with the liberty which her imagination had dared to take with the character of his father, could he ever forgive it? The absurdity of her curiosity and her fears, could they ever be forgotten? She hated herself more than she could express. He had, she thought he had, once or twice before this fatal morning shown something like affection for her, but now, in short, she made herself as miserable as possible for about half an hour, went down when the clock struck 5 with a broken heart, and could scarcely give an intelligible answer to Eleanor's inquiry if she was well. The formidable Henry soon followed her. followed her. The formidable Henry soon followed her into the room, and the only difference in his behavior to her was that he paid her rather more attention than usual. Catherine had never wanted comfort more, and he looked as if he was aware of it. The evening wore away with no abatement of this soothing politeness, and her spirits were gradually raised to a modest tranquillity. She did not learn either to forget or defend the past, but she learned to hope that it would never transpire farther, and that it might not cost her Henry's entire regard. And that it might not cost her Henry's entire regard. Her thoughts being still chiefly fixed on what she had with such causeless terror felt and done, nothing could shortly be clearer than it had been all nothing could shortly be clearer than that it had been all a voluntary self-created delusion, each trifling circumstance receiving importance from an imagination resolved on alarm, and everything forced to bend to one purpose by a mind which, before she entered the abbey, had been craving to be frightened. She remembered with what feelings she had prepared for a knowledge of Northanger. She saw that the infatuation had been created, the mischief settled long before her quitting Bath, and it seemed as if the whole might be traced to the influence of that sort of reading which she had there indulged. Charming as were all Mrs. Radcliffe's works, and charming even as were the works of all her imitators, it was not in them perhaps that human nature, at least in the Midland counties of England, was to be looked for. Of the Alps and Pyrenees, with their fine forests and their vices, they might give a faithful delineation, and Italy, Switzerland, and the south of France might be as fruitful in horrors as they were there presented. Catherine dared not doubt beyond her own country, and even of that, if hard pressed, would have yielded the northern and western extremities. But in the central part of England there was surely some security for the existence even of a wife not beloved, in the laws of the land and the manners of the age. Murder was not tolerated, servants were not slaves, and neither poison nor sleeping potions to be procured, like rhubarb, from every druggist. Among the Alps and Pyrenees, perhaps, there were no mixed characters. There, such as were not there, such as were not as spotless as an angel might have had the dispositions of a fiend. There, such as were not as spotless as an angel might have the dispositions of a fiend. But in England it was not so. Among the English, she believed, in their hearts and habits, there was a general though unequal mixture of good and bad. Upon this conviction, she would not be surprised if even in Henry and Eleanor Tinley some if even in Henry and Eleanor Tilney, some slight imperfection might hereafter appear. And upon this conviction she need not fear to acknowledge some actual specks in the character of their father, who, though cleared from the grossly injurious suspicions which she must which she must which she must ever blush to have entertained, she did believe, upon serious consideration, to be not perfectly amiable. Whether you're live or catching the replay, welcome. Hope you'll subscribe if you're not subscribed. I like to do this. I record these live, and then I stick them up as an audiobook after I edit out this kind of stuff from the track. So I love classic literature, and if you do too, this is a place to come hang out. Her mind made up on these several points, and her resolution formed of always judging and acting in future with the greatest good sense, she had nothing to do but to forgive herself and be happier than ever, and the lenient hand of time did much for her by insensible gradations in the course of another day. Henry's astonishing generosity and nobleness of conduct in never alluding in the slightest way to what had passed was of the greatest assistance to her, and sooner than she could have supposed it possible in the beginning of her distress, her spirits became absolutely comfortable and capable, as heretofore, of continual improvement by anything he said. There were still some subjects, indeed, under which she believed they must always tremble, the mention of a chest or a cabinet, for instance, and she did not love the sight of Japan in any shape. But even she could allow that an occasional memento of past folly, however painful, might not be without use. The anxieties of common life began soon to succeed to alarms of romance. Her desire of hearing from Isabella grew greater every day. She was quite impatient to know how the Bath world went on, and how the rooms were attended, and especially was she anxious to be assured of Isabella's having matched some fine netting and especially was she anxious to be assured of Isabella's having matched some and especially was she anxious to be assured of Isabella's having matched some fine netting cotton on which she had left her intent, and of her continuing on the best terms with James. Her only dependence for information of any kind was on Isabella. James had protested against writing to her till his return to Oxford, and Mrs. Allen had given no hopes of a letter till she had got back to Fullerton. But Isabella had promised and promised again, and when she promised a thing, she was so scrupulous in performing it. This made it so particularly strange. For 9 successive mornings, Catherine wondered over the repetition of a disappointment, which each morning became more severe. But on the 10th, when she entered the breakfast room, her first object was a letter held out by Henry's willing hand. She thanked him as heartily as if she had written it himself. "'Tis only from James, however." As she looked at the direction, she opened it. It was from Oxford, and to this purpose: "Dear Catherine, though God knows with little inclination for writing, I think it my duty to tell you that everything is at an end between Miss Thorpe and me. I left her in Bath yesterday, never to see either again. I shall not enter into particulars, they would only pain you more. You'll soon hear enough from another quarter to know where lies the blame, and I hope will acquit your brother of everything but the folly of too easily thinking his affection returned. Thank God, I'm undeceived in time. But it's a heavy blow, after my father's consent had been so kindly given. But no more of this. She has made me miserable forever. Let me soon hear from you, dear Catherine. You're my only friend. Your love I do build upon. I wish your visit to Northanger may be over before Captain Tilney makes his engagement known, or you'll be uncomfortably circumstanced. Poor Thorpe is in town. I dread the sight of him. His honest heart would feel so much. I've written to him and my father. Her duplicity hurts me more than all. Till the very last, if I reasoned with her, she declared herself as much attached to me as ever, and laughed at my fears. I'm ashamed to think how long I bore with it. But if ever man had reason to believe himself loved, I was that man. I cannot understand even now what she would be at, for there would be no need of my being played off to make her secure of Tilney. We parted at last by mutual consent. Happy for me happy for me had we never met. I can never expect to know such another woman. Dearest Catherine, beware how you give your heart. Believe me. Catherine had not read 3 lines before her sudden change of countenance and the short exclamations of sorrowing wonder declared her to be receiving unpleasant news. And Henry, earnestly watching her through the whole letter, saw plainly that it ended no better than it began. He was prevented, however, from even looking his surprise by his father's entrance. They went to breakfast directly, but Catherine could hardly eat anything. Tears filled her eyes and even ran down her cheeks as she sat. The letter was one moment in her hand, then in her lap, and then in her pocket. And she looked as if she knew not what she did. The general, between his cocoa and his newspaper, had luckily no leisure for noticing her. But to the other two, her distress was equally visible. As soon as she dared leave the table, she hurried away to her own room, but the housemaids were busy in it, and she was obliged to come down again. She turned into the drawing-room for privacy, but Henry and Eleanor had likewise retreated thither, and were at that moment deep in consultation about her. She drew back, trying to beg their pardon, but was, with gentle violence, forced to return, and the others withdrew, after Eleanor had affectionately expressed a wish of being of use or comfort to her. Making progress. How you doing? If you're live or catching the replay, welcome. If you're a literature aficionado, you've come to the right place. You know, I had a birthday recently, and my wife gave me a set of Jane Austen cloth-bound classics, and they're all in pastel colors, and they're just gorgeous. I'll have to show them to you one night. I don't have them in here, but I was stoked. What can I say? Jane is one of my favorite authors because when I was in the Army, Jane Austen novels helped me go far away from my surroundings. And so I've always thought of her as an escape, and I love the worlds that she created. Okay. After half an hour's free indulgence of grief and reflection, Catherine felt equal to encountering her friends, but whether she should make her distress known to them was another consideration. Perhaps, if particularly questioned, she might just give an idea, just distantly hint at it, but not more. To expose a friend, such a friend as Isabella had been to her, and then their own brother so closely concerned in it, she believed she must waive the subject altogether. Henry and Eleanor were by themselves in the breakfast room, and each, as she entered it, looked at her anxiously. Catherine took her place at the table, and after a short silence, Eleanor said, "No bad news from Fullerton, I hope? Mr. and Mrs. Morland, your brothers and sisters, I hope they are none of them ill?" "No, thank you," sighing as she spoke. "They are all very well. My letter was from my brother at Oxford." Nothing further was said for a few minutes, and then, speaking through her tears, she added, "I do not think I shall ever wish for a letter again." "I'm sorry," said Henry, closing the book he had just opened. "If I had suspected the letter of containing anything unwelcome, I should have given it with very different feelings." "It contained something worse than anybody could suppose. Poor James is so unhappy. You'll soon know why." "To have so kind-hearted, so affectionate a sister," replied Henry warmly, "must be a comfort to him under any distress." "I have one favor to beg," said Catherine shortly afterwards in an agitated manner, that if your brother should be coming here, you'll give me notice of it, that I may go away. Our, our brother? Frederick? Yes, I'm sure I should be very sorry to leave you so soon, but something has happened that would make it very dreadful for me to be in the same house with Captain Tilney. Eleanor's work was suspended while she gazed with increasing astonishment, but Henry began to suspect the truth, and something in which Miss Thorpe's name was included passed his lips. "How quick you are!" cried Catherine. "You've guessed it, I declare, and yet, when we talked about it in Bath, you little thought of its ending so. Isabella, no wonder now I've not heard from her, Isabella has deserted my brother and is to marry yours. Could you have believed there had been so much inconstancy and fickleness and everything that's bad in the world? I hope, so far as concerns my brother, you're misinformed. I hope he has not had any material share in bringing on Mr. Morland's disappointment. His marrying Miss Thorpe is not probable. I think you must be deceived so far. I'm very sorry for Mr. Morland, sorry that anyone you love should be unhappy, but my surprise should be greater at Frederick's marrying her than at any other part of the story. It's very true, however. You shall read James's letter for you. You shall read James's letter for yourself. Stay, there's one part, recollecting with a blush the last line. Will you take the trouble of reading to us the passages which concern my brother? No, read it yourself, cried Catherine, whose second thoughts were clearer. I don't know what I was thinking of, blushing again that she blushed before blushing again that she had blushed before. James only means to give me good advice. He gladly received the letter, and having read it through with close attention, returned it, saying, Well, if it be so, I can only say that I'm sorry for it. Frederick will not be the first man who has chosen a wife with Jessie. Frederick will not be the first man who has chosen a wife with sorry. Frederick will not be the first who has chosen a wife with less sense than his family expected. I do not envy his situation, either as a lover or a son. Miss Tilney, at Catherine's invitation, now read the letter likewise, and having expressed also her concern and surprise, began to inquire into Miss Thorpe's connections and fortune. Her mother is a very good sort of woman, was Catherine's answer. What was her father? A lawyer, I believe. They live at Putney. Are they a wealthy family? No, not very. I do believe Isabella has any I do not believe in I do not believe Isabella has any fortune at all, but that will not signify in your family. Your father's so very liberal. He told me the other day that he only valued money as it allowed him to promote the happiness of his children. The brother and sister looked at each other. But, said Eleanor after a short pause, would it be to promote his happiness to enable him to marry such a girl? She must be an unprincipled one, or she could not have used your brother so. And how strange an infatuation on Frederick's side. A girl who, before his eyes, is violating an engagement voluntarily entered into with another man. Is it not inconceivable, Henry? Frederick, too, who always wore his heart so proudly, who found no woman good enough to be loved. That's the most uncompromising circumstance, the strongest presumption against him. When I think of his past declarations, I give him up. Moreover, I have too good opinion of Miss Thorpe's prudence to suppose that she would part with one gentleman before the other was secured. It's all over with Frederick, indeed. He is a deceased man, defunct in understanding. Prepare for your sister-in-law, Eleanor, and such a sister-in-law as you might delight in. Open, candid, artless, guileless, with affections strong but simple, forming no pretensions and knowing no disguise. Such a sister-in-law, Henry, I should delight in, said Eleanor with a smile. But perhaps, observed Catherine, though she has behaved so ill by our family, she may behave better by yours. Now she has really got the man she likes, she may be constant. Indeed, I'm afraid she will, replied Henry. I'm afraid she'll be very constant, unless a baronet should come in her way. That's Frederick's only chance. I'll get the Bath paper and look over the arrivals. You think it's all for ambition, then? And upon my word, there are some things that seem very like it. I cannot forget that when she first knew what my father would do for them, she seemed quite disappointed that it was not more. I never was so deceived in anyone's character in my life before. Among all the great variety that you have known and studied, my own disappointment and loss in her is very great, but as for poor James, I suppose he will hardly ever recover it. Your brother is certainly very much to be pitied at present, but we must not, in our concern for his sufferings, undervalue yours. You feel, I suppose, that in losing Isabella, you lose half yourself. You feel a void in your heart which nothing else can occupy. Society is becoming irksome, and as for the amusements in which you were wont to share at Bath, the very idea of and without her is abhorrent. You would not, for instance, now go to a ball for the world. You feel that you have no longer any friend of whom you can speak with unreserve, on whose regard you can place dependence, or whose counsel in any difficulty you could rely on. You feel all this? No, said Catherine, after a few moments' reflection. I do not. Ought I? To say the truth, though I'm hurt and grieved that I cannot still love her, that I'm never to hear from her, perhaps never to see her again, I don't feel so very, very afflicted as one would have thought. You feel, as you always do, what is most the credit of human nature. What is most to the credit of human nature? Such feelings ought to be investigated, that they may know themselves. Catherine, by some chance or other, found her spirits so very much relieved by this conversation that she could not regret her being led on, though so unaccountably, to mention the circumstance which had produced it. That is the end of chapter 25. A very hearty good evening to you as well, sir. So we will go start chapter 26. Chapter 26. From this time, the subject was frequently canvassed by the three young people, and Catherine found, with some surprise, that her two young friends were perfectly agreed in considering Isabella's want of consequence and fortune as likely to throw great difficulties in the way of her marrying their brother. Their persuasion that the general would, upon this ground alone, independent of the objection that might be raised against her character, oppose the connection, turned her feelings, moreover, with some alarm towards herself. She was as insignificant and perhaps as portionless as Isabella, and if the heir of the Tilney property had not grandeur and wealth enough in himself, at what point of interest were the demands of his younger brother to rest? The very painful reflections to which this thought led could only be dispersed by a dependence on the effect of that particular partiality, which, as she was given to understand by his words as well as his actions, she had from the first been so fortunate as to excite in the general. And by a recollection of some most generous and disinterested sentiments on the subject of money, which she had more than once heard him utter, and which tempted her to think its disposition in some matters misunderstood by his children. They were so fully convinced, however, that their brother would not have the courage to apply in person for his father's consent, and so repeatedly assured her that he had never in his life been less likely to come to Northanger than at the present time, that she suffered her mind to be at ease as to the necessity of any sudden removal of her own. But it was not to be supposed that Captain Tilney, whenever he made his application, would give his father just any just idea of Isabella's conduct. It occurred to her as highly expedient that Henry should lay the whole business before him as it really was, enabling the general by that means to form a cool and impartial opinion, and prepare his objections on a fairer ground than inequality of situations. She proposed it to him accordingly, but he did not catch at the measure so eagerly as she had expected. "No," said he, "my father's hands need not be strengthened, and Frederick's confession of folly need not be forestalled. He must tell his own story." "But he will tell only half of it." "A quarter would be enough." A day or two passed away and brought no tidings of Captain Tilney. His brother and sister knew not what to think. Sometimes it appeared to them as if his silence would be the natural result of the suspected engagement, and at others that it was wholly incompatible with it. The general, meanwhile, though offended every morning by Frederick's remissness in writing, was free from any real anxiety about him, and had no more pressing solicitude than that of making Miss Morland's time at Northanger pass pleasantly. He often expressed his uneasiness on this head, feared the sameness of every day's society and employments would disgust her with the place, wished the Lady Frasers had been in the country, talked every now and then of having a large party for dinner, and once or twice even began to calculate the number of young dancing people in the neighborhood. But then it was such a dead time of year, no wild fowl, no game, and the Lady Frasers were not in the country. And it all ended, at last, in his telling Henry one morning that when he next went to Woodston, they would take him by surprise there some day or other and eat their mutton with him. Henry was greatly honored and very happy, and Catherine was quite delighted with the scheme. "And when do you think, sir, I may look forward to this pleasure? I must be at Woodston on Monday to a... Oh, And when do you think, sir, I may look forward to this pleasure? I must be at Woodston on Monday to attend the parish meeting, and shall probably be obliged to stay 2 or 3 days." This sometimes in Jane Austen stuff, she'll, I mean, anybody, I guess, but it won't say, like, said Captain Tilney, said Mr. Whatever. And you are left up to guessing, which is what I'm doing right now. And gotta know if I put it in a girl's voice or a boy's voice. Let's see. We'll take our chances on some of those days. There's no need to fix. You're not to put yourself out of your way. Whatever you may happen to have in the house will be enough. I think I can answer for the young ladies making allowance for a bachelor's table. Let me see. Monday will be a busy day with you. Will not come on Monday. And Tuesday will be a busy one with me. I expect my surveyor from Brockham with his report in the morning. And afterwards, I cannot in decency fail attending the club. I really could not face my acquaintance if I stayed away now, for I'm only known to be in the country. As I am known to be in the country, it would be taken exceedingly amiss, and it's a rule with me, Miss Morland, never to give offense to any of my neighbors if a small sacrifice of time and attention can prevent it. They're a set of very worthy men. They have half a buck from Northanger twice a year, and I dine with them whenever I can. Tuesday, therefore, we may say, is out of the question. But on Wednesday, I think, Henry, you may expect us, and we shall be with you early, that we may have time to look about us. 2 hours and 3/4 will carry us to Woodston, I suppose, and we shall be in the carriage by 10. So about a quarter before 1 on Wednesday, you may look for us. A ball itself could not have been more welcome to Catherine than this little excursion. So strong was her desire to be acquainted with Woodston, and her heart was still bounding with joy when Henry, about an hour afterwards, came booted and great-coated into the room where she and Eleanor were sitting, and said, "I'm come, young ladies, in a very moralizing strain, to observe that our pleasures in this world are always to be paid for, and that we often purchase them at a great disadvantage, giving ready-moneyed actual happiness for a draft on the future that may not be honored. Witness myself at this present hour, because I am to hope for the satisfaction of seeing you at Woodston on Wednesday, which bad weather or 20 other causes may prevent. I must go away directly, 2 days before I had intended it." "Go away," said Catherine, with a very long face, "and why?" "Why? How can you ask the question? Because no time is to be lost in frightening my old housekeeper out of her wits, because I must go and prepare a dinner for you, to be sure." "Oh, not seriously?" "Aye, and sadly too, for I much rather Aye, and sadly too, for I'd much rather stay. But how can you think of such a thing after what the general said, when he so particularly desired you not to give yourself any trouble because anything would do? Henry only smiled. I'm sure it's quite unnecessary upon your sister's account and mine. You must know. Uh, Henry only smiled. I'm sure it's quite unnecessary upon your sister's account and mine. You must know it to be so. And the general made such a point of your providing nothing extraordinary. Besides, if he had not said half so much as he did, he has always such an excellent dinner at home that sitting down to a middling one for one day could not signify. I wish I could reason like I wish I could reason like you for his sake and my own. Goodbye. As tomorrow's Sunday, Eleanor, I shall not return. He went, and it being at any time a much simpler operation to Catherine to doubt her own judgment than Henry's, she was very soon obliged to give him credit for being right, however disagreeable to her his going. But the inexplicability of the general's conduct dwelt much on her thoughts. That he was very particular in his eating, she said, by her own unassisted observation already discovered, but why why he should say one thing so positively and mean another all the while was most unaccountable. How were people at that rate to be understood? Who but Henry could have been aware of what his father was at? From Saturday to Wednesday, however, they were now to be without Henry. This was a sad finale of every reflection, and Captain Tilney's letter would certainly come in his absence, and Wednesday, she was very much sure, would be wet. The past, present, and future were all equally in gloom. Her brother so unhappy, and her loss, and Isabella so great, and Eleanor's spirits always affected by Henry's absence. What was there to interest or amuse her? She was tired of the woods and the shrubberies, always so smooth and so dry, and the Abbey in itself was no more to her now than any other house. The painful remembrance of the folly it had helped to nourish and the painful remembrance of the folly it had helped to nourish and perfect was the only emotion which could spring from a consideration of the building. What a revolution in her ideas! She who had so longed to be in an abbey. Now there was nothing so charming to her imagination as the unpretending comfort of a well-connected parsonage, something like Fullerton, but better. Fullerton had its faults, but Woodston probably had none. If Wednesday should ever come. All right, getting on through this chapter. Let's see. Man, I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that. Sean, what's going on? What is going on, my man? All right, okay. It did come, and exactly when it might be reasonably looked for. It came, it was fine, and Catherine trod on air. By 10 o'clock, the chaise and four conveyed the two from the Abbey, and after an agreeable drive of almost 20 miles, they entered Woodston, a large and populous village in a situation not unpleasant. Catherine was ashamed to say how pretty she thought it, as the general seemed to think an apology necessary for the flatness of the country and the size of the village. But in her heart she preferred it to any place she had ever been at, and looked with great admiration at every neat house above the rank of a cottage, and at all the little chandlers' shops which they passed. At the further end of the village, and tolerably disengaged from the rest of it, stood the parsonage, a new built substantial stone house with its semicircular sweep and green gates. And as they drove up to the door, Henry, with the friends of his solitude, a large Newfoundland puppy and two or three terriers, was ready to receive and make much of them. Catherine's mind was too full as she entered the house for her either to observe or to say a great deal, and till called on by the general for her opinion of it, she had very little idea of the room in which she was sitting. Upon looking round it then, she perceived in a moment that it was the most comfortable room in the world, but she was too guarded to say so, and the coldness of her praise disappointed him. "We're not calling it a good house," said he. "We're not comparing it with Fullerton and Northanger. We're considering it as a mere parsonage, small and confined, we allow, but decent, perhaps, and habitable, and altogether not inferior to the generality. Or, in other words, I believe there are few country parsonages in England half so good. It may admit of improvement, however. Far be it from me to say otherwise, and anything in reason, a bow thrown out perhaps, though perhaps ourselves, if there's one thing more than another, my aversion is a patched if there's one thing more than another, my aversion, it's a patched on bow." Catherine did not hear him. Catherine did not hear enough of this speech to understand or be pained by it, and other subjects being studiously brought forward and supported by Henry, at the same time that a tray full of refreshments was introduced by his servant, the general was shortly restored to his complacency, and Catherine to all her usual ease of spirits. Well, man, thank you for dropping by. Always good to see you. Always good to see you. And good to see you too, whoever's in the chat or catching the replay. Thanks for watching. Okay. The room in question was of a commodious, well proportioned size and handsomely fitted up as a dining parlor. And on their quitting it to walk round the grounds, she was shown first into a smaller apartment, belonging particularly to the master of the house, and made unusually tidy on the occasion, and afterwards into what was to be the drawing room, with the appearance of which, though unfurnished, Catherine was delighted enough even to satisfy the general. It was prettily it was a prettily shaped room. The windows reached to the ground, and the view from them pleasant, though only over green meadows, and she expressed her admiration at the moment with all the honest simplicity which she felt it. "Oh, why do you not fit up this room, Mr. Tilney? What a pity not to have it fitted up. It's the prettiest room I ever saw. It's the prettiest room in the world." "I trust," said the general with a most satisfied smile, "that it will very speedily be furnished. It waits only for a lady's taste." "Well, if it was my house, I should never sit anywhere else. Oh, what a sweet little cottage there among the trees. Apple trees, too. It's the prettiest cottage." "You like it. You approve it as an object. It's enough. Henry, remember that Robinson is spoken to about it. The cottage remains." Such a compliment recalled all Catherine's consciousness and silenced her directly. And though pointedly applied to by the general for her choice of the prevailing color of the paper and hangings, nothing like an opinion on the subject could be drawn from her. The influence of fresh objects and fresh air, however, was of great use in dissipating these embarrassing associations. And having reached the ornamental part of the premises, consisting of a walk round two sides of a meadow, on which Henry's genius had begun to act about half a year ago, she was sufficiently recovered to think it prettier than any pleasure ground she had ever been in before, though there was not a shrub in it higher than the green bench in the corner. A saunter into the other meadows, and through part of the village, with a visit to the stables to examine some improvements, and a charming game of play with a litter of puppies just able to roll about, brought them to 4 o'clock, when Catherine scarcely thought it could be 3. At 4 they were to dine, and at 6 to set off on their return. Never had any day passed so quickly. She could not but observe that the abundance of the dinner she could not but observe that the abundance of the dinner did not seem to create the smallest astonishment in the general, nay, that he was even looking at the side table for cold meat which was not there. His son and daughter's observations were of a different kind. They had seldom seen him eat so heartily at any table but his own, and never before known him so little disconcerted by the melted butters being oiled. At 6 o'clock, the general having taken his coffee, the carriage again received them, and so gratifying had been the tenor of his conduct throughout the whole visit, So well assured was her mind on the subject of his expectations that, could she have felt equally confident of the wishes of his son, Catherine would have quitted Woodston with little anxiety as to how or the when. Catherine would have quitted Woodston with the Catherine would have quitted Woodston with little anxiety as to the how or the when she might return to it. That was chapter 26. Oh, that's awesome. It's I'm this is my first time. I guess I mean first time reading it aloud, obviously, but I guess my second time through it. But I it's growing on me. I wouldn't. I mean, I like all of Jane Austen's stuff, but I think my favorite is. It used to be Persuasion at one point in my life, and then another point I like Pride and Prejudice, and then I don't know. I don't know what my favorite is. I'm loving this too, though. Loving it. All right, so on to chapter 27. I don't think I've done more than 2 chapters in this before, but told you I'm trying to get through this, trying to get it done. So onward to chapter 27. And also, if you are a Jane Austen fan, of course I've done Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility, um, and I'm working on. Well, I've done Persuasion, and I'm working on this one. Which one would you want to see done next? Um, uh, Emma, Mansfield Park, and then of course there's some of the lesser. I guess it's less popular, but Lady Susan is one, and then I think there's one other one, and I forget the name of it. Anywho, if you have preference, let me know in the comments, especially out of Emma and Mansfield Park, because I like Jane Austen a lot. Okay, on to chapter 27. The next morning brought the following very unexpected letter from Isabella. My dearest Catherine, I received your 2 kind letters with the greatest delight, and have 1,000 apologies to make for not answering them sooner. I really am quite ashamed of my idleness, but in this horrid place one can find time for nothing. I have had my pen in hand to begin a letter. I have had my pen in my hand to begin a letter to you almost every day since you left Bath, but have always been prevented by some silly trifler or other. Pray write to me soon, and direct to my own home. Thank God we leave this vile place tomorrow. Since you went away, I've had no pleasure in it. The dust is beyond anything, and everybody one cares for is gone. I believe if I could see you, I should not mind the rest, for you're dearer to me than anybody for you're dearer to me than anybody can conceive. I'm quite uneasy about your dear brother, not having heard from him since he went to Oxford, and am fearful of some misunderstanding. Your kind offices will set all right. He's the only man I ever did or could love, and I trust you will convince him of it. The spring fashions are partly down, and the hat's the most frightful you can imagine. I hope you spent your time pleasantly, but am afraid you never think of me. I will not say all that I could of the family you're with, because I would not be ungenerous or set you against those you esteem, but it's very difficult to know whom to trust, and young men never know their minds 2 days together. I rejoice to say that the young man whom, of all others, I particularly abhor has left Bath. You will know from his description. I must mean Captain Tilney, who, as you may remember, was amazingly disposed to follow and tease me before you went away. Afterwards he got worse, and became quite my shadow. Many girls might have been taken in, for never were such intentions, but I knew the fickle sex too well. He went away to his regiment 2 days ago, and I trust I shall never be plagued with him again. He's the greatest coxcomb I ever saw, and amazingly disagreeable. The last 2 days he was always by the side of Charlotte Davis. I pitied his taste, but took no notice of him. I pitied his taste, but took no notice of him. The last time the last time we met was in Bath Street, and I turned directly into a shop that he might not speak to me. I would not even look at him. He went into the pump room afterwards, but I would not have followed him for all the world. Such a contrast between him and your brother. Pray send me some news of the latter. I'm quite unhappy about him. He seemed so uncomfortable when he went away with a cold or something that affected his spirits. I would write to him myself, but have mislaid his direction, and as I hinted above, am afraid he took something in my conduct amiss. Pray explain everything to his satisfaction, or if he still harbors my doubt, a line from him to me, or a call at Pulteney when next in town might set all to rights. I have not been to the rooms this age, nor to the play, except going in last night with the Hodges for a frolic at half price. They teased me into it, and I was determined they should not say I shut myself up because Tilney was gone. What happened? We happened to sit by the Mitchells, and they pretended to be quite surprised to see me out. I knew their spite. At one time they could not be civil to me, but now they're all friendship. But I'm not such a fool as to be taken in by them. You know I have a pretty good spirit of my own. Anne Mitchell had tried to put on a turban like mine, as I wore it the week before at the concert, but made wretched work of it. It happened to become my odd face, I believe, at least Tilney told me so at the time, and said every eye was upon me. But he's the last man whose word I would take. I wear nothing but purple now. I know I look hideous in it, but no matter. It's your dear brother's favorite color. Lose no time, my dearest, sweetest Catherine, in writing to him and to me, whoever am, etc. Such a strain of shallow artifice could not impose even Catherine. Such a strain of shallow artifice could not impose even upon Catherine. Its inconsistencies, contradictions, and falsehood struck her from the very first. She was ashamed of Isabella, and ashamed of ever having loved her. Her professions of attachment were now as disgusting as her excuses were empty, and her demands impudent. Write to James on her behalf? No, James should never hear Isabella's name mentioned by her again. On Henry's arrival from Woodston, she made known to him and Eleanor their brother's safety, congratulating them with sincerity on it, and reading aloud the most material passages of her letter with strong indignation. When she had finished it, "So much for Isabella," she cried, "and for all our intimacy. She must think me an idiot, or she could not have written so. But perhaps this has served to make her character better known to me than mine is to her. I see what she's been about. She's a vain coquette, and her tricks have not answered. I do not believe she ever had any regard either for James or for me, and I wish I'd never known her." "It will soon be as if you never had," said Henry. "There's but one thing that I cannot understand. I see that she has had designs on Captain Tilney which have not succeeded, but I do not understand what Captain Tilney has been about all this time. Why should he pay her such attentions as to make her quarrel with my brother and then fly off himself? I have very little to say for Frederick's motives, such as I believe them to have been. He has his vanities as well as Miss Thorpe, and the chief difference is that, having a stronger head, they have not yet injured himself. If the effect of his behavior does not justify him with you, we better not seek after the cause." "Then you do not believe he ever really cared about her?" "I'm persuaded he never did." "And only made believe to do so for mischief's sake?" Henry bowed his assent. "Well, then, I must say I do not like him at all. Though it has turned out so well for us, I do not like him at all. As it happens, there's no great harm done, because I don't think Isabella has any heart to lose. But suppose he had made her very much in love with him. But we must first suppose Isabella to have had a heart to lose, consequently to have been a very different creature, and in that case she would have met with very different treatment. It's very right that you should stand by your brother. And if you would stand by yours, You would be much distressed by the you would be much distressed by the disappointment of Miss Thorpe, but your mind is warped by an innate principle of general integrity, and therefore not accessible to the cool reasonings of family partiality or a desire of revenge. Catherine was complimented out of further bitterness. Frederick could not be unpardonably guilty, while Henry made himself so agreeable. She resolved on not answering Isabella's letter and tried to think no more of it. That was chapter 27. Let me see. So we've done 3 chapters. Been at it almost an hour. That's a long reading for me. Oh, chapter 28 is kind of long. 29 is kind of long. 30 is not too long. 31 is pretty short. So we only got 4 chapters to go. I think I shall go on to chapter 28. Okay. Chapter 28. Soon after this, the general found himself obliged to go to London for a week, and he left Northanger earnestly regretting that any necessity should rob him even for an hour of Miss Morland's company, and anxiously recommending the study of her comfort and amusement to his children as their chief object in his absence. His departure gave Catherine the first experimental conviction that a loss may be sometimes a gain. The happiness with which their time now passed, every employment voluntary, every laugh indulged, every meal a scene of ease and good humor, walking where they liked and where they liked, their hours, pleasures, and fatigues at their own command, made her thoroughly sensible of the restraint which the general's presence had imposed, and most thankfully feel their present release from it. Such ease and such delights made her love the place and the people more and more every day. And had it not been for a dread of its soon becoming expedient to leave the one, and an apprehension of not being equally beloved by the other, she would at each moment of each day have been perfectly happy. But she was now in the 4th week of her visit. Before the general came home, the 4th week would be turned, and perhaps it might seem an intrusion if she stayed much longer. This was a painful consideration whenever it occurred, and eager to get rid of such a weight on her mind, she very soon resolved to speak to Eleanor about it at once, propose going away, and be guided in her conduct by the manner in which her proposal might be taken. Aware that if she gave herself much time, she might feel it difficult to bring forward so unpleasant a subject, she took the first opportunity of being suddenly alone with Eleanor and of Eleanor's being in the middle of a speech about something very different to start forth her obligation of going away very soon. Eleanor looked and declared herself much concerned. She had hoped for the pleasure of her company for a much longer time, had been misled, perhaps by her wishes, to support that a much longer visit had been promised, and could not but think that if Mr. and Mrs. Morland were aware of the pleasures it was to have her here, they would be too generous to hasten her return. Catherine explained. Oh, as to that, Papa and Mamma were in no hurry at all. As long as she was happy, they would always be satisfied. Then why might she ask in such a hurry herself to leave them? Oh, because she had been there so long. Nay, if you can use such a word, I can urge you no farther. If you think it long. Oh, no, I do not indeed. For my own pleasures, I thought I could stay with you as long again. and it was directly settled that till she had her leaving them was not even to be thought of. In having this cause of uneasiness so pleasantly removed, the force of the other was likewise weakened. The kindness, the earnestness of Eleanor's manner in pressing her to stay, and Henry's gratified look on being told that her stay was determined, were such sweet proofs of her importance with them as left her only just so much solicitude as the human mind can ever comfortably do without. As left her only just so much solicitude as the human mind can never do comfortably without. She did, almost always, believe that Henry loved her, and quite always that his father and sister loved and even wished her to belong to them, and believing so far her doubts and anxieties were merely sportive irritations. Henry was not able to obey his father's injunction. Henry was not able to obey his father's injunction of remaining wholly at Northanger in attendance on the ladies during his absence in London. The engagements of his curate at Woodston obliging him to leave them on Saturday for a couple nights. His loss was not now what it had been when the general was at home. It lessened their gaiety, but did not ruin their comfort, and the two girls, agreeing in occupation and improving in intimacy, found themselves so well sufficient for the time to themselves that it was 11 o'clock, rather a late hour at the Abbey, before they quitted the supper room on the day of Henry's departure. They had just reached the head of the stairs when it seemed, as far as the thickness of the walls would allow them to judge, that a carriage was driving up to the door, and the next moment confirmed the idea by the loud noise of the house bell. After the first perturbation of surprise had passed away, in a "good heaven, what can be the matter?" it was quickly decided by Eleanor to be her eldest brother, whose arrival was often as sudden, if not quite so unreasonable, and accordingly she hurried down to welcome him. Catherine walked on to her chamber, making up her mind as well as she could to a further acquaintance with Captain Tilney, and comforting herself under the unpleasant impression his conduct had given her, and the persuasion of his being by far too fine a gentleman to approve of her, that at least they should not meet under such circumstances as would make their meeting materially painful. She trusted he would never speak of Miss Thorpe, and indeed, as he must by this time be ashamed of the part he had acted, there could be no danger of it, and as long as all mention of Bath scenes were avoided, she thought she could behave to him very civilly. In such considerations time passed away, and it was certainly in his favor that Eleanor should be glad to see him, and have so much to say, for half an hour was almost gone since his arrival, and Eleanor did not come up. At that moment, Catherine thought she heard her step in the gallery, and listened for its continuance, but all was silent. Scarcely, however, had she convicted her fancy of error when the noise of something moving close to her door made her start. It seemed as if someone was touching the very doorway, and in another moment a slight motion of the lock proved that some hand must be on it. She trembled a little at the idea of anyone's approaching so cautiously, but resolving not to be again overcome by trivial appearances of alarm, or misled by a raised imagination, she stepped quietly forward and opened the door. Eleanor, and only Eleanor, stood there. Catherine's spirits, however, were tranquilized but for an instant, for Eleanor's cheeks were pale, and her manner greatly agitated. Though evidently intending to come in, it seemed an effort to enter the room, and a still greater to speak when there. Catherine, supposing some uneasiness on Captain Tilney's account, could only express her concern by silent attention, obliged her to be seated, rubbed her temples with lavender water, and hung over her with affectionate solicitude. "My dear Catherine, you must not indeed," were Eleanor's first connected words. "I'm quite well. This kindness distracts me. I cannot bear it. I come to you on such an errand." "Errand? To me? How shall I tell you? Oh, how shall I tell you? A new idea now darted into Catherine's mind, and turning as pale as her friend, she exclaimed, "'Tis a messenger from Woodston. 'Tis a messenger from Woodston." "You're mistaken indeed," returned Eleanor, looking at her most compassionately. "It's no one from Woodston. It's my father himself." Her voice faltered, and her eyes were turned to the ground as she mentioned his name. His unlooked-for return was enough to make in itself Catherine's heart sink, and for a few moments she hardly supposed there were anything worse to be told. She said nothing, and Eleanor, endeavoring to collect herself and speak with firmness, but with eyes still cast down, soon went on. "You're too good, I'm sure, to think the worse of me for the part I'm obliged to perform. I am indeed a most unwilling messenger. After what has so lately passed, so lately been settled between us, how joyfully, how thankfully on my side, as to your continuing here as I hoped for many, many weeks longer, how can I tell you that your kindness is not to be accepted, and that the happiness of your company has hitherto given us and that the happiness your company has hitherto given us to and that the happiness your company has hitherto given us is to be repaid by. But I must not trust myself with words. My dear Catherine, we are to part. My father has recollected an engagement that takes our whole family away on Monday. We're going to Lord Longtown's near Hereford for a fortnight. Explanation and apology are equally impossible. I cannot attempt either." "My dear Eleanor," cried Catherine, suppressing her feelings as well as she could, "do not be so distressed. A second engagement must give way to a first. I'm very, very sorry we're to part. I'm very, very sorry we're to part. So soon and so suddenly, too, but I'm not offended. Indeed, I'm not. I can finish my visit here, you know, at any time, or I hope you'll come to me. Can you, when you finish from this Lord's, come to Fullerton? It will not be in my power, Catherine." "Well, come when you can, then." Eleanor made no answer, and Catherine's thought recurring to something more directly interesting, she added, thinking aloud, "Monday. So soon as Monday, and you'll all go. Well, I'm certain of I shall be able to take leave, however. I need not go till just before you do, you know. Do not be distressed, Eleanor. I can go on Monday very well. My mother and father having no notice of it is of very little consequence. The general will send a servant with me, I dare say, half the way, and then I shall soon be at Salisbury, and then I'm only 9 miles from home. Ah, Catherine, were it settled so, it would be somewhat less tolerable, though in such common attentions you would have received but half of what you ought. But how can I tell you? Tomorrow morning is fixed for your leaving us, and not even the hour is left to your choice. The very carriage is ordered, and will be here at 7 o'clock, and no servant will be offered to you." Catherine sat down, breathless and speechless. "I could hardly believe my senses when I heard it. No displeasure, no resentment that you can feel at this moment, however justly great, can be more than I myself. But I must not talk of what I felt. Oh, that I could suggest anything in extenuation. Good God, what will your father and mother say, after courting you from the protection of real friends to this, almost double distance from your home, to have you driven out of the house without the considerations even of decent civility? Dear, dear Catherine, in being the bearer of such a message, I'm myself guilty of all its insult. Yet I trust you'll acquit me, for you must have been long enough in this house to see that I'm but a nominal mistress of it, that my real power is nothing." "Have I offended the general?" said Catherine in a faltering voice. "Alas, for my feelings as a daughter, all that I know, all that I answer for, is that you can have given him no just cause of offense. He certainly is very greatly discomposed. I've seldom seen him more so. His temper is not happy, and something has now occurred to ruffle it to an uncommon degree. Some disappointment, some vexation, which just at this moment seems important, which I can hardly suppose you to have any concern in it, for how is it possible?" It was with pain that Catherine could speak at all, and it was only for Eleanor's sake that she attempted it. I'm sure, said she, I'm very sorry if I've offended him. It was the last thing I would willingly have done. But do not be unhappy, Eleanor, as engagement, you know, must be kept. I'm only sorry it was not recollected sooner that I might have written home, but it's of very little consequence. I earnestly hope that to your real safety it will be of none, but to everything else it is of the greatest consequence. To comfort, appearance, propriety, to your family, to the world. Were your friends the Allens still in Bath, you might go to them with comparative ease. A few hours would take you there, but a journey of 70 miles to be taken by, to be taken but a journey of 70 miles to be taken post by you at your age alone, unattended. Oh, the journey's nothing. Don't think of that. And if we're to part a few hours sooner or later, makes no difference. I can be ready by 7. Let me be called in time. Eleanor saw that she wished to be alone, and believing it better for each that they avoid any further conversation, now left her. I shall see you in the morning. Not quite done. Got a little bit further to go. Hey, Jennifer. Have a great night. Thanks for dropping in. Catherine's swelling heart needed relief. In Eleanor's presence, friendship and pride had equally restrained her tears, but no sooner was she gone than they burst forth in torrents. Turned from the house, and in such a way, without any reason that could justify, any apology that could atone for the abruptness, the rudeness, nay, the insolence of it. Henry at a distance, not able to even bid him farewell. Every hope, every expectation from him suspended at least, and who could say how long? Who could say when they might meet again? And all this by such a man as General Tilney, so polite, so well bred, and heretofore so particularly fond of her. It was as incomprehensible as it was mortifying and grievous. For what could it for what From what it could arise and where it would end were considerations of equal perplexity and alarm. The manner in which it was done, so grossly uncivil, hurrying her away without any reference to her own convenience, or allowing her even the appearance of her choice as to the time or mode of her travelling, of 2 days the earliest fixed on, and of that almost the earliest hour, as if resolved to have her gone before he was stirring in the morning, that he might not be obliged even to see her. What could all this mean but an intentional affront? By some means or other, she must have had the misfortune to offend him. Eleanor had wished to spare her from so painful a notion, but Catherine could not believe it possible that any injury or misfortune could provoke such ill will against a person not connected, or at least not supposed to be connected with it. Heavily passed the night. Sleep or repose that deserved the name of sleep was out of the question. That room in which her disturbed imagination had tormented her on her first arrival was again the scene of agitated spirits and unquiet slumbers. Yet how different now the source of her inquietude from what it had been then, how mournfully superior in reality and substance. Her anxiety had foundation in fact, her fears in probability, and with a mind so occupied in the contemplation of actual and natural evil, the solicitude of her situation, the darkness of her chamber, the antiquity of the building, were felt and considered without the smallest emotion. And though the wind was high, and often produced strange and sudden noises throughout the house, she heard it all as she lay awake, hour after hour, without curiosity or terror. Soon after 6, Eleanor entered her room, eager to show attention or give assistance where it was possible, but very little remained to be done. Catherine had not loitered. She was almost dressed, and her packing almost finished. The possibility of some conciliatory message from the general occurred to her as his daughter appeared. What so natural as that anger should pass away and repentance succeed it? And she only wanted to know how far, after what had passed, an apology might properly be received by her. But the knowledge would have been useless here. It was not called for. Neither clemency nor dignity was put to the trial. Eleanor brought no message. Very little passed between them on meeting. Each found her greatest safety in silence, and few and trivial were the sentences exchanged while they remained upstairs. Catherine in busy agitation, complete in her dress, and Eleanor with more goodwill than experience intent upon filling the trunk. When everything was done, they left the room, Catherine lingering only half a minute behind her friend to throw a parting glance on every well-known, cherished object, and went down to the breakfast parlor where breakfast was prepared. She tried to eat as well as save herself from the pain of being urged as to make her friend comfortable, but she had no appetite and could not swallow many mouthfuls. The contrast between this and her last breakfast in that room gave her fresh misery and strengthened her distaste for everything before her. It was not 24 hours ago since they had met there at the same repast, but in the circumstances how different. With what cheerful ease, what happy, though false, security had she then looked around her, and enjoying everything present, and fearing little in future beyond Henry's going to Woodston for a day. Happy, happy breakfast, for Henry had been there. Henry had sat by her and helped her. These reflections were long indulged, undisturbed by any address from her companion, who sat as deep in thought as herself, and the appearance of the carriage was the first thing to startle and recall them to the present moment. Catherine's color rose at the sight of it, and the indignity with which she was treated, striking at that instant on her mind with peculiar force, made her for a short time sensible only of resentment. Eleanor seemed now impelled into resolution and speech. "You must write to me, Catherine," she cried. "You must let me hear from you as soon as possible. Till I know you're safe at home, I shall not have an hour's comfort. For one letter, at all risks, all hazards, I must entreat. Let me have the satisfaction of knowing that you're safe at Fullerton and have found your family well, and then, till I can ask for your correspondences as I ought to, I will not expect more. Direct me to Lord Longtown's, and I must ask under cover to Alice. No, Eleanor, if you're not allowed to receive a letter from me, I'm sure I had better not write. There can be no doubt of my getting home safe." Eleanor only replied, "I cannot wonder at your feelings. I will not importune you. I will trust to your own kindness of heart when I am at a distance from you. But this, with the look of sorrow accompanying it, was enough to melt Catherine's pride in a moment, and she instantly said, "Oh, Eleanor, I will indeed write you." There was yet another point which Miss Tilney was anxious to settle. Let's see. Almost done here. I just lost my place. Okay. There was yet another point which Miss Tilney was anxious to settle, though somewhat embarrassed in speaking of it. It had occurred to her, after so long an absence from home, Catherine might not be provided with money enough for the expenses of her journey, and upon suggesting it to her with most affectionate offers of accommodation, it proved to be exactly the case. Catherine had never thought on the subject till that moment, but upon examining her purse, was convinced that but for this kindness of her friend, she might have been turned from the house without even the means of getting home, and the distress in which she must have been thereby involved filling the minds of both. Scarcely another word was said by either during the time of their remaining together. Short, however, was that time. The carriage was soon announced to be ready, and Catherine, instantly rising, a long and affectionate embrace supplied the place of language in bidding each other adieu, and as they entered the hall, unable to leave the house without some mention of one whose name had not yet been spoken by either, she paused a moment, and with quivering lips just made it intelligible that she left her kind remembrance of her absent friend. But But with this approach to his name ended all possibility of restraining her feelings. Hiding her face as well as she could with her handkerchief, she darted across the hall, jumped into the chaise, and in a moment was driven from the door. That was chapter... hello there, Arcane fan. How's it going? Hope you're having a good night. That was chapter 28. So we've only got 3 chapters left. 29, 30, 31, and we'll be done. So that's good. Did four chapters tonight. Yeah, so that's pretty cool. And yeah, so hopefully I'll see you tomorrow. If you enjoyed this, I'll be back. Try to finish the book tomorrow evening. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope you subscribe if you haven't. Hope you like the video if you haven't, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.